أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Let's resume our discussion. And dear brothers, if you have, I understand that in the course of our discussion, some questions may arise. So you, I think you can bear with me until I finish the whole discussion. And once I complete, then I'll take your questions. I'll be answering all of your questions, inshallah. But the reason I would like you to wait, because the later part of the discussion may already answer some of your questions that may arise in the early part of the discussion. Okay. See, we are talking about how we this discussion um, might not impair the impression about other people. It's not really to disgrace. Okay. And another thing related, we need to understand that if some situations uh, arose later, long after the period of Rasulullah, when it was not easy for the people uh, who had to work for Deen. And to exemplify, let's think about a sick person. He is taking some special food like porridge or soup or something, or maybe injectable saline he's taking. So no one is gonna complain against against him because he's sick. Okay. So three things are actually considered here, based on which we won't complain. First of all, his condition, which is called halat. Secondly, his abilities or qualities, which we can call istidat. Okay. And thirdly, the takaza or demand he has. So condition or halat, istidat, which meaning his abilities or qualities, and finally takaza or demand. So since he is a sick person, he's sick, and sickness is the condition, and abilities, by abilities means every type of person is not equally able to react. I mean, all people don't react the same way for a particular level of sickness, right? Some people are more qualified or more healthy, they react less. So the what food he can really take depends both on his level of sickness and how healthy he is, or how what his qualities are, okay, which we are calling istidat. And finally, he has some takas or demand to take food, or intake is his demand. So so that's why in this condition he is taking soup or porridge, which is not the normal food, and there is no complaint. Okay. However, two things, okay, we need to keep in mind. First of all, what he is taking is not really the normal food. This porridge or soup or whatever, injectable saline, whatever. That's not the normal food. So we need to really understand what the normal food is. What is really given as normal food for people. Secondly, one must have the intention that this guy gets back to normal food. The intention must be there, right? Okay. Similarly, say there are some situations where it's in some restaurants, okay, or somehow in some places, it's very difficult to eat in the sunnah method. In the sunnah method, one has to sit and put his food at the same level. So not really easy in some restaurants or some other food areas in many different places, okay, formal places. So that is that environment is the condition where it is getting difficult. So in that condition, so if someone maybe uh, we may not complain about someone who is facing this sort of situation or condition, and in this age, his abilities or qualities does not allow him to take a very courageous step, okay, so he may be just eating on tables and chairs, and the demand here is his hunger, or that he needs to take food, okay. So in this condition, and considering his abilities, and also considering the fact that he needs to take food, the intake of food is his demand, so we may not actually complain, right? So maybe he's taking food on table and chair, which we should consider fine, okay? Like that sick person, okay, because of sickness he's taking for, so there is absolutely no complaint, okay, there's absolutely no complaint against him, okay. Now, eh, long after the period of Rasulullah, the condition of the world became very unfavorable, and and istidat, so that's about halat, the istidat of people degraded, but there is still the demand of the effort of deen. So the demand is there, the efforts of deen should go on. So in those conditions, they had to adopt or use some methods which are not fully compliant with sunnah, okay, but there is no complaint, because what, three things: halat, istidat, and takaza, okay. So there's actually deviation from sunnah, deviation from sunnah. However, the two things, remember the two things that one needs to keep in mind, like the example of eating food on table and chair, one still needs to have two things, like one needs to understand, one must not forget that eating at the same level, okay, is the sunnah. That's the sunnah. That's the real sunnah method, or that's the what has been descended. That's the divine method. So eating on table and chair is not the divine one. That's a man-made method. One is to keep that in mind. Secondly, one must have the intention that in future it may not really happen, but anyway, he needs to have the intention that he gets back to the sunnah method of taking food. He can eat at the same level, he can follow the sunnah method. So one must have that intention, right? So these two things. So similarly, the this is the reality that people had to deviate from the sunnah method in some cases. But there's, first of all, there is no complaint, and secondly, okay, similarly, uh, about the people who had little different method from sunnah, uh, we need to keep in mind that that's not the sunnah method, okay, although there is no complaint, not an iota of complaint, but that method is not sunnah, so that is not real deen. Deen is founded on kalima, and so if there is a deviation from kalima, from the sunnah method, then actually it's not deen. like eating on table and chair is not deen really. Okay. uh, so that's the first thing. The second thing is one must have the intention that we get back to the sunnah method. Okay. Now I'll go through the deviation. Okay. How uh, gradually there was a good level of deviation. So in the after the period of Rasulullah and uh, um, the efforts of Deen uh, gradually found some uh, dislocations, okay, found some differences in the priority. Like there are three different types of um, or three classes of efforts of Deen. I said right in the beginning. Dawa, do you remember? Dawa, Talim, and Tajkiya, right? Now, can you tell me which was dominant among these three at the time of Sahaba radiallahu anhu? It was Dawa. It was always Dawa. It was always Dawa at the time of Sahaba radiallahu anhu. That was dominant among these three. Okay. So since after Sahaba, there is no uh, there is no sample of Deen. Okay, the uh, sample of Deen or what can represent Deen is limited by the lives of Sahaba. Not anyone after them don't represent. Okay. Well, if of course I said earlier too, someone after Sahaba may have a lot of things which are matching with Sahaba, then those things we can definitely follow. But it's because that's matching with Sahaba. But if the same person has a few things which does not match, those things are not. I mean, one should not follow, right? He may be a very pious person, but nevertheless, if there is something in him or he says something which does not match with Sabaradil, that's not something we need to follow or we're supposed to follow. Okay, okay, so that's not really Deen. Okay, now uh, what happened uh, after some sometime after the period of Sabaradil on whom it was found that Deen has uh, I mean it could spread to some good extent. Okay. So uh, in the I mean within the world it could Deen could spread to some good extent, but the preservation of ilm became very important. Okay. So then the effort of ilm was given higher priority. It was prioritized over the rest. Okay. So so the method of talim got higher priority. Uh, consider and the you see the requirement. Okay, the is the condition that preservation of LM is the requirement. So that's the condition, and there is I mean all halat istidat takas everything is there. Okay, but nevertheless it's a deviation from Sahaba radhiyallahu anhu, okay? In this period, Bukhari, the popular book of Hadith, written by Imam Bukhari, rahmatullahi, was written. Okay, so I mean, all these are very useful and beneficial work, but nevertheless, there is a deviation from the method of Sabar. That the method of the efforts of Talim was given top priority in this period, and that's a deviation. Okay, Long after this period, the preservation of ilm also got some uh, mature level, but people felt a weak status in their hearts. And then the effort of Tajkia was given the top priority. Okay. So these things were actually, uh, uh, if we consider the condition, okay, halat istirab takaz, if we consider all of them, then there is no complaint against this deviation in the order. However, all these are slight deviations, not major. Okay, because we are just changing the priority. Okay, so it is a deviation from Saba, from the method of Saba, but it's not a major deviation because we're changing only the priority. However, what happened uh, as a major deviation later, the Dawa efforts pretty much died out um, in several hundred years after Rasul. And thereafter, it's not only the priority, rather, gradually, the actual method started to get twisted. Okay, like the method of talim, the effort of talim, okay, it started to change. So that was a major violation then. And how it started? Uh, pretty much like in the century of I mean AD 1000, if we consider the century between 1000 AD and 1100 AD. That's the major timing for the change of the method of effort of talim. Primarily, the change started with dislocation of the effort. The effort was shifted from the masjid. It was taken somewhere else, in some other built spaces. Like um, how it, what can be the first example? There is some controversy, but one of the major example of how it started is that Sultan Mahmud Ghaznavi, he was very powerful king, and I mean the term Sultan started to be used from his time because to I mean Sultan actually represented his extraordinary power. So he was very powerful and wealthy. So he built a very decorated masjid. He could spend a lot of money on that. So, and then it was called the throne of Akhira, throne of the life hereafter. Okay, because of his beauty. Now, this kind of beautiful and expensive masjid could not be kept open all the time. Okay, at that time, I mean, in the past, all these three efforts of Deen, Dawa, Talim, Tazkiyah, used to take place in the masjid. Okay, they were almost masjid-based efforts. So Talim was also held in masjid, but then when he found uh, this masjid uh, extraordinary, he started to keep it locked at times other than the period of Salah. Okay, uh, so, but he was very Islamic minded. So what he did, he established another building. So in a separate built space, he started the method, the talim, okay, the theological education, and that's how shifting of talim from the masjid started. And this new place is which we can call the place for education, place for teaching, okay, mother's place for teaching, okay. uh, uh, I mean, that's how the term madrasa started, okay. So that's how madrasa, that's the story of inception of madrasa. So from then, uh, or pretty much like that's probably the first example. But over the whole century, the period of Sultan Mahmud Ghaznavi is from 997 AD through 1027 AD. Okay. So within his period, somewhere within his period, he built this first madrasa. But there are some other parallel establishment. There might be some other parallel establishment of the initial madrasas. But gradually, over this whole century, gradually more and more madrasas created. So the madrasa is nothing but shifting the place for talim. Okay.
The madrasa can actually be defined this way. Madrasas are of two types, the male madrasa and the female madrasa. The male madrasa can be defined as a place where the talim for the guys has been shifted to from the masjid. The talim was just banished from the masjid and then taken to the madrasa. That's what the male madrasa is. And the female madrasa is the place where the talim for women was shifted to from the houses. So again, talim was banished from the houses for women, and it was taken to what can be called the female madrasa.